Welcome to Paradigms at paradigms.life, the radio show and podcast that brings you inspiring people with visions of a viable future for life on Earth that includes humans. Hi, I'm Baruch, host of Paradigms. Glad to be with you. Thanks for tuning in. I think you'll find this episode very interesting. My guest is the author of the new book, The Price of Immortality, The Race to Live Forever. Now, the quest for eternal life has been a human pursuit for ever throughout history. In this book, the author explores contemporary efforts being made to prolong life and talks about folks who are really looking to live forever. We'll be examining a little bit the science and the economics and some of the ethical issues around the quest for immortality. So let's get right to it and meet my guest on this episode of Paradigms. Peter Ward, welcome to Paradigms.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be on the show.
It is a pleasure to have you. You've written a very interesting book, The Price of Immortality, The Race to Live Forever. What a concept. Something people have been chasing for a long time, which I guess I find a little ironic. But I'm curious to know, firstly, a little bit about you as a person, but also what attracted you to this issue.
My previous book was about space. So I wrote a book about the privatization of the space industry. And when I was reporting that book, and when I was doing the interviews, I spoke to a lot of people who were really interested in taking space to sort of the furthest possible conclusion, which is colonization of space. And when you start to think about going further and further in space, then you get the question of, how can we travel such large distances that would take hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of years to reach and not obviously die along the way. So there was this sort of core group of people who were really enthusiastic about this, and their interests were also in, as a direct consequence, they wanted to find out how we could live longer and delay death as long as possible. So through those people, I got into the topic, and I found it fascinating. I love speaking to people that have these really huge, lofty goals, even if, sometimes they're not as realistic as they could be. I still love people with really optimistic and outlandish objectives. So I went down to the logical place to go, which is the Church of Perpetual Life in Florida, which is a church that preaches that we can reach immortality and that people living today will be able to be immortal. So I went down to a service that they had. They were very welcoming, and I met a bunch of people. And initially, I was thinking of doing a documentary on it with a couple of friends. But once I mentioned the subject to my publisher, they decided that this would actually make a really good book. So I delved into it on my own, and it's been a great journey.
It's been an interesting read, and I was thinking about all the things I want to ask you, and I have a whole list, and I probably won't get through them all. So this movement, and I don't know if you created the word or not, but I love it, Immortalists. The Immortalists, I guess my first big questions are, who are they, and what are the things they're actually doing to try and bring this about? I think people probably be really interested to know what's actually happening in this field.
I can't lay claim to the term Immortalists. That was established way before I got involved. So Immortalists are essentially people who believe that they can live forever, and they'll do pretty much anything to sort of chase that goal. So it's not so much in a spiritual sense. It's very much in a practical, physical manner that we can live forever in our current bodies, and our consciousness will kind of go on. So there's various ways that you can pursue that. And the Immortalist approach is to kind of attack all of them at the same time, because you never know which one is going to work, and you don't want to rule one out only for that one to obviously be the one that keeps people alive. I think the first thing they do is nutrition, a lot of supplements. So they do study a lot of reports and a lot of scientific papers for sort of things that could potentially that have made animals live longer, or that could potentially make humans live longer. So a lot of it is taking those supplements. There's also a lot of sort of taking blood tests to see where you are, looking at your biomarkers to see how theoretically how biologically old your body is. Obviously, we have a chronological age, which we celebrate every year, but that doesn't tell us how old our body is in terms of how long it potentially has got to go, assuming we don't have any accidents or diseases.
Right, sort of the condition of our cells and how they're reproducing. And
Absolutely, yeah. So they do that, and then there's sort of more sort of outlandish things. There's things like some immortalists look into digital immortality. So one way you could prepare for that is to record a lot of what you are and what you say. That has a potential to help in the future if someone were to make a digital immortal version of yourself. So there's some people that record their conversations and never think about their personality. So the plan B, that the last option, is cryonics, which is to have your sign up to, if you do die, have your body frozen, and then potentially it can be reanimated in the future. So one possibility from that is to have your brain sort of downloaded and then your consciousness recreated sort of digitally. And so the idea is by recording all these things that make you, that whoever was doing that recreation could sort of fall back onto those recordings to say, okay, there's gaps in the knowledge of who this person is. So we're going to look at those recordings and look at these mannerisms, look at these histories that they've recorded. So all of these things they acknowledge fully are completely long shots. I mean, they sound like science fiction. And obviously they have been science fiction. There's been some great movies and some great TV shows and books written about them. But they believe that, they may as well try them, because the phrase that's used a lot is it's better than being in the control group. So they sort of believe that everyone is in the control group, and they're just going to put themselves in the group that has taken these chances, and maybe one of them will come off.
You said this is not spiritual immortality, it's physical immortality. But in saying that, we acknowledge that there are belief systems that have to do with reincarnation or extended life, or that there's an afterlife when this body dies. And I wonder about the collision of these ideological spaces.
It's an interesting question. There's quite a few people in the space who are also religious. So there's a lot of people who believe we're going to live forever, and they're Mormon, for example. There's a Mormon transhumanist society, which is fairly prominent. So the way it usually integrates with spirituality and religion, particularly organized religion, is a lot of particularly most Western religions prophesize, obviously, that someday we'll live in God's kingdom in heaven. So a lot of immortalists and transhumanists believe that that's not a kind of passive thing that we should just let happen. That's something that humans are destined to do ourselves. So part of that is to create the best world here on Earth, and a big part of that would be to eliminate death. And so they think that this is actually creating heaven on earth, is pursuing this goal of immortality. So it's interesting how that connects. Even though a lot of people in this sort of space are completely atheist, there's still a lot of sort of spiritual feeling about it, I think. Sort of this is a mission and a goal, and a lot of people are very humanist, and they're very concerned about the human population. So inevitably you do get some sort of spiritual tendencies. It's almost a little bit like religion sometimes, with the ritualistic taking of all these supplements and things like that. So there is a little bit of spirituality about it, even in the most atheist people, I think.
As you were talking and you said it, it's just what I was thinking. It's another religion. It's another belief system where human beings are trying to somehow address the great mystery, which it has always been called, and which we continue to wonder about or make up stories about or have beliefs about. But no one knows. I mean, there are people who've had what are called near-death experiences and then come back, and they have something to say about their experience, but so do the neurologists have something to say about their experience. So I guess one of the things I'm aware of in listening to you is it sounds like it's humans once again trying to find certainty in a world that has always been uncertain, and that uncertainty creates fear. And nowadays, especially with climate change and the degradation of the biosphere, there's so much fear of annihilation that it gets projected into our politics and into beliefs about race and all that stuff. But it all seems like part of the great human condition of questioning, what are we, why are we, and where are we going? And I'm not saying it's wrong. I don't know. But I have a question. Would you like to live forever?
Would I? I don't know. It's a tough question to answer. I think, sitting here now today, I could comfortably say, oh, I'm happy. I'd be happy to live a long, happy life and then die. But ask me, if my circumstances changed, if someone close to me was ill and I could offer them immortality, then I'd take it. If, I was all of a sudden sort of faced with death, then immortality would become a lot more appealing very suddenly. So yeah, I imagine as you get older, it becomes more appealing as well. We all want more time. We all want more time to do things. We all think that we don't have enough time. Yeah, and it's interesting what you're saying, because one of the books I read in research for this book was Ernest Becker's Denial of Death, which is a really good. It's part philosophy, part psychiatry, psychology. He essentially says that death is the one motivating factor for everything that we do. We're constantly aware that we're going to die, and it's the one cruel sort of part of our existence, is that we have these brains which are overdeveloped and more developed than anything else on the planet, and it can take us to other places. We can imagine we're in other places, other times, but they're housed in these bodies which are basically just rotting in front of us. So it makes that really uncomfortable thing, and that drives everything we do. And I think that explains, in the most extreme form of that, I think that explains the immortalist way of thinking. It's imagine what we could do if we did conquer death, if we did take it out of the equation.
My dog died in October, and I would give anything to have him have had a longer life.
Yeah. The same with my dog. I'm sorry to hear about your dog, but it's true. Yeah, as soon as death comes even close to us, especially for someone we love, it makes us think. You'd take that deal in an instant.
That's how people sell their souls to the devil, right?
Yeah,
figuratively.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's the problem. That's what I found in the book. There's that gap in knowledge. We know that their science is improving, that maybe we can do things to help us live longer, but we don't know how to make people immortal. So in that sort of gap of, I desperately want to live longer, or I desperately want my loved one to live longer, and the science not being there are a lot of bad actors in that. And there always have been people that will scam you, people that will take you for all your money. And so, yeah, the deals with the devil that we have in mythology and stories nowadays, it's the con men who'll take your money, and you'll still die.
In going through all this and thinking about the questions, part of what came to me, my particular bent is, very sort of egalitarian activism, political stuff. And so I started thinking, okay, let's say this comes about. Who gets it? Well, the rich people get it, right? And who are the rich people? The rich people are mostly the white people. So who gets it, and what does that do to the world?
Yeah, that's a massive question, and it's inevitable. If there was a cure for death, there would never be a one silver bullet that would cure death. But let's say, for example, tomorrow there was a vaccine against death, which we could all take. It would be enormously priced, and it would be very selectively handed out. And it's exactly like you said, it would go to rich white people first.
And corrupt rich white people, because they're the ones who always get it first.
Yeah, and those are the ones that increasingly put in the money into the research as well. You see the names that are linked with immortality science now, and you worry, because it's the people that have amassed fortunes. And, I believe you can't amass that kind of fortune without having some kind of corruption.
There's a moral issue to hoarding.
Exactly. Yeah. And it came back to my research into space. It's the same thing. If you're really invested in this, and if you want something to happen, then your first reaction to a billionaire or multi-billionaire getting involved is great. This is going to make it happen faster. But I think a lot of people need to stop and think, actually, it matters who does this, and it matters the character of that person, because you can find yourself in a hellish dystopia very quickly.
The other thing that I think is interesting about this is this could all be taken as metaphor for the state of humanity right now and what we are facing, which is a choice around our own continued existence. We really are at a choice point, and actively our behavior matters in what's going to happen next. And so in a way, this is sort of a metaphoric opportunity to examine what matters to us, what's really important to humanity. And humanity. Well, it's a really big, general, all of us kind of word. We are individuals and different things matter differently to different people. What are your thoughts about the implications of this for us, including you personally, but all of us?
Yeah, I mean, it's strange to think. It would change what makes us completely. If we did eliminate death, if we did the ultimate thing, like, would we still be human? Would we still be driven to do anything? Would we? There's an argument to say we would need to take better care of our planet because we'd be the ones living on it. There's an argument to say we'd need to take care of other people because we're going to be here with the same people the whole time. But then that's a very optimistic view. Unfortunately, I'd love that to be the case. But I can also see it going completely the other way. If you think just of politics, imagine if the older generation who recently, in the past few years have voted for Brexit, a lot of older voters voted in Donald Trump. Imagine if that generation never stopped voting; they just carried on voting. It would be I'm
going to have nightmares now.
Yeah, and you could say maybe they would be different, but imagine a world where the only way you die would be through an act of violence or an accident. We'd be extremely terrified. We'd be terrified of each other. We wouldn't leave the house. So yeah, there's a lot of really deep philosophical questions that you can go into once you sort of take this as a possibility. But what I kept coming back to in the book was there is something good to be found in that pursuit, which is to somehow ease suffering. And I believe firmly that suffering is a lot worse than death. That if this anti-aging science that's coming through and everything can somehow make us live healthier for longer, but we probably will still die at 120. A lot of people believe that's the cap. But the key is to make people suffer for fewer years in their life. And that would be something that would keep us whole, that would keep us who we are. But it would obviously reduce so much pain, suffering, illness in people's lives that I think we would become a better species and better guardians of the planet.
What do you think about what Peter is saying and this whole area of study of immortality or life extension? What are your thoughts about it? Love to see your comments. All right, back to the interview. One of the things that's been said for a long time is that we're not as mature as our technologies are developed. We develop technologies that we don't have the emotional maturity to be wise about. And so I wonder if that applies here too at this point. Maybe we can grow in wisdom. I mean, with the nuclear weapons issue, we haven't actually done so great with growing in wisdom, but maybe with this we can.
Yeah. I mean, that's the hope. That's the hope that the medical technologies we develop along the way will be used, democratically. Everyone will have access to them, and everyone in the world. But like we see with the vaccine, that didn't happen in the case of COVID. So yeah, I mean, hopefully it would do. I think it's hard to see. I would love to be. Everyone says I'm not an optimist, but I would love that to be the case. But I don't see how, just in America, for example, the way the healthcare system is so broken. I don't see how we can roll these things out in a way in which it's not just the rich. I don't see what could be powerful enough to break that system, which is so self-feeding and just completely corrupt. Yeah. And with COVID, I think it was really, I mean, it was really strange writing a book about living forever during a global pandemic.
It must have been.
It was bizarre. I was in New York when I started writing this. But when I signed on to write this, signed the deal, it was just after the pandemic had really happened. I was in New York at the time, and things were really, really hairy in New York at that time. There was, constant sirens and everything. And I thought, what am I signing on to do here? This could be mentally torturous, and I didn't even know, if the book would ever make it out.
It would actually make a great movie, a movie about a guy writing a book about immortality in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah. I mean, they would probably have to make it a little bit more exciting than my life, but add in a few action scenes. But yeah.
It must have presented you with contradictions to address.
Yeah, absolutely. It was like being sort of constantly reminded of death on all sides. One of the things that I realized, and COVID sort of hammered home was how hard we work to avoid death and to convince ourselves that death is something that happens to the other person, not us. So you saw in the sort of in the reports of, you know, how many people have died in the UK, the government would announce how many people have been hospitalized each day right at the start of the pandemic, and they'd say, you know, and sadly we lost 5 people to COVID. And that language changed as it went on. They stopped saying sadly, and now they say, you know, 200, 300 people died yesterday of COVID, and people don't even look at the numbers. We just shrug it off. It's interesting to see how we cope with it, and then we sort of rationalize in our heads to say, oh well, it wouldn't be someone near us. We added all of these things. As soon as someone said, oh, they, you know, my friend or my relative died of COVID, the first things they'd be asked would be, oh, were they ill already? Or did they have a pre-existing condition? Just something to say, okay, well, there's a reason why they died. It couldn't happen to me because I don't have that.
That's interesting, because my brother died, and I find when I tell people, I feel that I must also tell them that he was older and had health issues.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have to, because nobody should die of something that is, you know, preventable. No matter what, we all have conditions. We're all going to be old, and we all have something with us that could get us. You know, I think that was one of the really horrible things that came out of the pandemic, was that we almost stigmatized people that did have pre-existing conditions, saying, oh well, it's okay because they died.
I've seen so many comments in newspapers about, well, it's only the old and sick. I find that beyond offensive. It's like, well, if we really believe that every life has value, then we have to treat people that way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Which, to come back to immortality, if every life has value and we achieve immortality, I mean, obviously, if people want to keep reproducing, we're going to need more space. And that's addressed in the book. And the space people and the immortality people have a lot of overlap in the Venn diagram. So,
Yeah.
you know, but I guess it's always true with anything that happens to all of us, which is it's an opportunity to grow into a more peaceful people or to grow in other directions. And it kind of feels like we do all of it at the same time.
The overpopulation question is a really interesting one. And the Immortalists will tell you essentially that if we've got to the point where we can make people live to 200, 300, then we've probably got other technologies to increase our resources and to do other things, space travel or something else. But that is a really dangerous way of looking at it, because you're assuming that something will be done.
We'll take care of that in the future. It'll be all right. We don't have to think about that.
Exactly, yeah. And the one thing that humans have always enjoyed doing is, you know, killing each other over resources. So if there were more of us and the same amount of resources, then that could get pretty scary pretty quickly.
Here's a question about the science of it. I'm sure you've learned some stuff. You know, the laws of conservation of energy. Energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It just changes form. And we have the reality of time. Time is a bit of a concept that, from a scientific point of view, is actually relative, and we don't fully understand it. And we know that traveling at the speed of light can change the way we experience time. We know that a watch that is orbiting the Earth in a space station keeps time differently than a watch here on Earth. So how do we bring together what we know about matter and what we know about time to look at creating biological continuity?
That is a very tough question.
That's the question.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest questions. And I think because there's so much that we don't know, all biologists can do right now and all immortalists can do right now is concentrate how to make our bodies live longer. So that's where the sort of disconnect from immortality comes from. All the research and everything that immortalists will point to, all it's doing is trying to make us live slightly longer or slightly healthier. But if you start throwing in those kinds of considerations, then you realize just how hard a task this is. You could potentially make someone immortal by throwing them into a black hole, because time goes so much slower. You would be in agony, but your last moment would last forever.
Yeah.
You know, but you could do the same thing with if you made it digital immortality. There's that question of why we haven't seen aliens, why we haven't made contact with aliens. And one of the theories that came out fairly recently was that when a civilization goes so far, they actually don't go outwards into the universe, they go inwards into virtual realities. If you could trick the brain to experience time differently, then you could create immortality in what would be a second here on Earth. So that's another way of doing it, potentially. But it would require us to know so much more about the way time works, about the way the brain experiences time. That's really, really far out there. A lot of it relies on a massive increase in speed in terms of how our technology is being developed. And the singularity is one concept that would account for that we reach the point where, we build an artificial intelligence that's capable of building a better artificial intelligence, and it all of a sudden goes exponential. And I think, exponential sort of increases is something that we as humans struggle to get our heads around, because it's really hard. There's the thing of, how many, I was reading something the other day that said if you had to beat everyone on Earth, if there's a one-on-one competition tournament, say you're playing rock, paper, scissors, one-on-one with everyone, how many games would you have to win if everyone in the world was competing? And it's something like 32. It's a very small number because it's that exponential thing that, it goes down by half. And also the folding the paper thing, about how many times you need to fold the paper to reach the moon, and it's a very short number. So that gives people a lot of hope, because it's that exponential curve that once it gets going, that exponential curve, it's really hard for us to get our head around how quickly technology would progress and what things we could do. Obviously, the concern is that we'd lose a handle on that and we wouldn't be able to control it. But
talk to Schwarzenegger about that.
Yeah.
I've had this thought my whole life that at the moment of death, it's like an endless echo. It's like a reverb, because once the brain dies, it's done. But for our consciousness can't be conscious of its own non-existence. So experientially, that moment of death is forever. Kind of like you were talking about the black hole. Like maybe death is the black hole in a way.
Yeah. And that's as good a theory as anyone has, because there's so much we don't know. And it's crazy. There's so much we don't know about human consciousness, and there's so much we don't know about what makes us us. And if you get into the sort of the really tricky things, is, are we the same person? Are we the same person that we were 10 minutes ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? So are we destined to be sort of immortal as the person that we were when we died? Or would you revert to the person when you're 20 years old? All our cells have changed. Everything about us have changed. We're hopefully a little bit more mature and a bit more intelligent by the time we're older. But yeah, it's so that was one of the things with the sort of the Eastern religions as well. It's sort of, if you can be immortal, it's like, or if we're constantly being reincarnated, like which version of us is being reincarnated is a really valid question.
I work as a psychotherapist, and some of what we work with is people's past, their younger selves. My explanation to people, my working theory, is that we sort of have recorded or are all of our iterations up to the present, and that we can refer back to any of those iterations, the 10 minutes ago one, the 20 years ago one. And it works as a working model for doing therapy. But it's a concept, it's a construct. Who knows what's actually real about that?
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's all a sort of story that we tell ourselves, isn't it? It's however we construct that narrative about ourselves.
And what you just said is true about its life. Our lives are a story we tell ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Fascinating. Well, like the topic, this conversation could go on forever. I mean, what a concept, forever. I guess I want to ask you, in coming to some closure, what did you get out of this project? What are you for yourself kind of pulled together for this? It's done, the book is done, it's out. What are you left with?
Firstly, relief that it's done in sort of testing circumstances during COVID and everything else. It definitely made me appreciate what I have. This is a very cheesy remark, but it definitely made me think, that I am lucky for what I have, and I should be more appreciative of what I have, and that I don't want to get stuck in a loop where I'm looking forward, trying to increase years. I just want to be in the moment and enjoy what I have now. And I think a lot of the Immortalists, the one mistake they make is that they're too busy worrying about how old they're going to get and how long they've got left. And I talk about Greek mythology a lot at the start of the book, and the stories of
Orpheus.
Orpheus, yes, and not looking back and having to look forward. And I think the same can be said of sort of looking too far forward as well. Like one of the, I could take all these supplements and I could starve myself and diet and not do the things I want to do, because maybe I'll live a little bit longer, or maybe I'll catch a wave and I'll live a lot longer. But my sort of takeaway is that I really need to appreciate what I have now, really enjoy what I have now, and not do anything to ruin that. Because if you really look into the topic of immortality, you do appreciate how fragile life is and how difficult that concept is to achieve, because something can get you at any time. It is terrifying. So yeah, that would be the main takeaway. I also met a lot of great people who really expanded my mind, my way of thinking of things. Some people I didn't agree with, but I just really enjoyed talking to them anyway. Some people doing some things which I think are crazy, on the verge of dangerous, but I still got something from them. And then mainly the scientists and the researchers who are working on aging are doing some really amazing things, which I think gives me real hope that we'll address some of the biggest things, the cancer, heart disease, and things like that, which would genuinely make a better world for all of us.
That's great. Peter, thank you for talking with me about it. I'm fascinated now, more than I was. Really interesting. I wish you all the best, and may your life go as long as you want it to.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and you too. Yeah,
Thank
it's
you.
been great being on the show. Thank you.
Peter Ward, interesting conversation. Thank you for being on the show. Interesting book, The Price of Immortality, The Race to Live Forever. Some people would like to live forever, some people wouldn't. What do you think? If you'd like to know more about this book and about Peter Ward, you can go to the website of his publisher. It's mhpbooks.com. Peter's areas of interest certainly are relevant and topical, and I'll be curious to see what his next book is about. But check this one out, The Price of Immortality, The Race to Live Forever. And if you enjoyed this episode of Paradigms, I hope you'll check out our archive at the Paradigms website, paradigms.life, and in iTunes and wherever else you find your podcasts. Paradigms is also on YouTube now. We have a YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and search for Paradigms Podcast. We very much value our Patreon supporters, and thank you so much. Please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/paradigms. The question about immortality is interesting, but to be honest, I find it more interesting to wonder how to make things work with what we've got now, rather than trying to live forever. But think about it. If you were going to live forever, how would you want to live? What do you think would need to change on Earth and for humanity if this were to become something that was really possible? What kinds of questions does this bring up for you? All right, well, we're going to wrap up this episode and let the word for the week be eternity. Ponder eternity. Cosmological, personal eternity. All right, Baruch signing off for Paradigms. We'll see you next time with more inspiring people. Until then, be well. You've been listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.